Brutal winter, a cold and snowy spring. Climate scientists used to say winters would be a thing of the past because of climate change. Now they say it's making them worse. They also blame climate change for war, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, and even a decline in mental health. The world now spends $1 billion a day to keep the Earth from warming. Child that has a fever. And we're told that 97% of scientists believe climate change is happening. But is it? In his best-selling book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, climate skeptic Marc Morano shares the facts you haven't been told and argues that the bad news about the Earth's climate is wrong.
Coming on is in the book, I actually detail peer-reviewed studies showing that there's been no acceleration in sea level. And Al Gore in his film shows that Florida is half underwater, not just Miami. Miami is actually sinking. It's called subsidence. But there's no acceleration in the global sea level, so you cannot link that to mankind is always battling the shores. Sea levels have been rising for 10,000 plus years. Since right now, for Gore to come up with all these future scare scenarios and get people terrified when there's no scientific basis right now for that at all. That's one of the cons, is what I call this, in this climate debate. Well, since the 1960s, the modern environmental movement has been essentially hijacked by the left. And what they've tried to do, and in the book I go back to the 1960s and 70s to the other environmental scares, things like resource scarcity, we're going to run out of food, we're going to have famines, we're going to have overpopulation, there's too many people, the global cooling scare. And I show that those scares all had the same solutions they're proposing today. It was a different environmental scare, same solution. And the solutions are centralized planning, wealth redistribution, and sovereignty threatening international organizations. And the UN is very open. Environmental climate policy isn't about the environment. We want to redistribute wealth by climate policy. They openly call for global governance. So they're just using global warming as the latest environmental scare in order to achieve that agenda. Well, that has been now analyzed, and it's the most expensive treaty in world history. $100 trillion is the estimated cost. We're already spending $1 trillion a day.
Trillion?
That's the estimate by Bjørn Lomborg, a Danish statistician, looking at this, and it would achieve nothing. And here's the thing: not only would it cost money, not only would it commit nations to lose sovereignty and start being essentially having to bow to a UN international organization, but it would have, even if you trusted the UN science and Al Gore believed everything they said, it would have no impact on temperatures 100 years from now. So it's all a massive bureaucratic wealth redistribution scheme to do nothing for the climate if, in fact, we actually faced a crisis. I like to say that this is no more than medieval witchcraft. People believe that the United Nations and the United States EPA can regulate the temperature and control storminess. They used to believe that in the Middle Ages. Those witches can control weather. Those witches are causing crop failure. Now they're blaming our SUVs and our cars. Problem is, the public hasn't bought this. According to Gallup polling, there's no change in concern, essentially, from global warming from the 1980s to now. And one of the reasons is people like Al Gore don't follow their own advice. He lives with multiple homes, private jets, huge carbon footprint, but he preaches to everyone else that we should be, taking baths together to save water, that we should be biking to work, that we should be, watching every little bit of our carbon footprint. He himself is unwilling to do it. It's almost like the Soviet Politburo. You have one standard for the party insiders. You can live in lavish, and then the masses have to follow all the rules and regulations, and they have to be kept in check. And that's yes, in fact, many scientists, including Russian scientists, solar scientists, are predicting a coming cooling. But here's the thing. It's not about whether it's carbon dioxide or whether it's even the sun. In the book, I detail and I interview Nobel Prize-winning scientists and Princeton physicists and former United Nations scientists who turned against the UN. It's quite literally hundreds of factors that influence the climate. So right now they're trying to analyze what's going on. By some estimates, we're at 100-year or more sunspot low activity. And many people are predicting a coming cooling. Just the last 2 years have seen a significant drop in temperature since the height of the last ocean cycle of El Nino. So yes, global cooling is possible. Don't know how severe it's going to be. They always say prediction is very hard, especially about the future. And so I don't like to get into predicting in this game, but we do know that nothing unusual is happening or warmer than today. And we had the Renaissance. We had all this crops and vineyards growing, and England had booming production. And then in recent times, they said we have to get rid, UN scientists said we have to get rid of the medieval warm period because we didn't have coal plants and SUVs, and it was inconvenient to explain how something could be as warm or warmer than today. So they went back in the data and they erased the medieval warm period. They erased the 1930s in the United States as the hottest decade. They went back and cooled the past, all to show as a campaign cause that the temperatures are allegedly unprecedented today.
So you're saying they're lying? Warming was the greatest threat facing civilization, didn't it?
And it's a tragedy that there wasn't enough pushback on President Obama for saying that. It's the greatest threat we face. It is changing climate is in the history of the Earth. Right now, we're in probably the 10% coldest period in the Earth's geologic history. In other words, 90% of the Earth has been warmer than today. We have not had it where we could have ice at both poles like we do now. So geologically speaking, nothing unusual is going on. So for President Obama to say that is beyond science. That's becoming a religious belief. And by the way, the head of the UN climate panel actually said, and I'm not making this up, global warming is my religion. NASA study shows it's actually growing. The ice, the land-based glacier ice has been expanding, and it's contributing to a sea level lowering. In other words, it's actually growing so much, and it's actually been through a cooling phase. Now, the Arctic, people will say, oh, well, he's not talking about the Arctic. Well, the Arctic at the North Pole, there's studies showing that the 1920s, 30s may have had a similar amounts of ice, that it's very cyclical. And keep in mind, they put in satellites, started monitoring the Arctic back in the 1970s when we were going through the global cooling phase. So it's not unreasonable to say the Arctic has warmed since everyone was worried about a coming ice age and global cooling in the 1970s.
Have you had?
And one of the things I spend a lot of time on in the book is the indoctrination of children, Pat. From kindergarten through college, children are being indoctrinated from day one on we're all going to die. Our modern way of living is destroying the earth. And I actually interviewed college students when I was in South Africa at a UN climate summit. And they actually said that the American way of life is total BS, and that the poor people in the developing world, people who don't have running water and electricity, are the ones living earth-friendly. I featured California Governor Jerry Brown saying that the Africa can't emulate the United States wealth because the earth can't handle it. And this is where you get to the sinister agenda, because Al Gore, I also feature him saying that we need ubiquitous fertility management. In other words, we need to prevent the number of Africans, because he says Africa is projected to have a huge population increase. A white, wealthy Western politician telling at a Bill Gates function, televised, that we have too many people of color in the developing world and we need fertility management to prevent that. He has lined himself with advisors that have a similar mindset. He's done very anti-Catholic doctrine with his advisors. There are people who believe that, overpopulation and fertility management and family planning and international agencies and all sorts of things the Catholic Church preaches against. He's allowed the Catholic Church now to align themselves, what I call an unholy alliance. And it's continuing, though. So it's infecting all parts of our culture. It's a point. You just look at all you have to do is look at the Earth's history. And one of the scientists, a Princeton physicist I point out in the book, he says we're currently in a carbon dioxide famine on Earth. In other words, this is one of the lowest levels of carbon dioxide we've had. We've had ice ages with many times higher carbon dioxide. So this whole idea that the public is in a panic, it's not about science. It's literally about their agenda. And that's what I point out in the book. When I interviewed the UN climate chief, she said, Cristina Figueres, we seek a centralized transformation that will make life on planet Earth very different. Run by the United Nations. People need to wake up. And fortunately, President Trump, and you see the attacks he's under with all the daily attacks, and his EPA chief, the same thing, Scott Pruitt.
Yeah.
He has committed heresy in Washington. He's done what no other Republican EPA chief has done. And I'll repeat that. Scott Pruitt, Donald Trump's EPA chief, has done what no other Republican EPA chief. He's stood up to the climate change establishment. George W. Bush appointees didn't do it. And George H.W. Bush appointees didn't do it.'s done it, and they are going after him, filing through 20-year-old real estate deals. They are trying to get rid of him because he had the audacity to try to actually fulfill Donald Trump's campaign promises on climate, which they cannot fathom in Washington.